Hey guys, tonight we trudge through the narrow, lamplit alleys of a bustling medieval town as you shoulder crates of fine cloth and barrels of exotic spices, the air thick with wood smoke and animal dung. You feel the rough rope burn at your palms as you haul your goods toward the city gate, every step echoing against timbered walls slick with rain. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Feel free to tell me where and when you started watching, perhaps in the quiet of your study or curled under cozy blankets, and don't hesitate to drop a compliment if you're already intrigued. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You haul your cart toward the wooden gate, your fingers slick with sweat as you brace for the toll collector's demand. The cart's wheels groan over muddy ruts, and stray dogs yelp from dark doorways. Behind you, the inn's lantern glimmers like a beacon of safety you've already forsaken. Even before you depart, being a medieval merchant is a gamble on every level. Weather, bandits, customs officials, and even the risk that your hometown guild might refuse to honour your shipment. Historians still argue whether merchants were primarily driven by a spirit of enterprise, or forced into perilous trades by a lack of local opportunity. As you reach the gatehouse, a burly gatekeeper emerges, grizzled and suspicious. Tapping his cudgel against the wooden beam, he demands half a silver penny per sack of flour, then grumbles that the rate was supposed to be lower. Only weeks ago, he accepted less. You wonder if he's secretly testing your bartering skills to add spice to his afternoon. This mainstream fact shows that tolls and customs duties varied wildly by region, sometimes doubling or tripling the cost of goods within a single day. You slide a sack of wheat past the gatekeeper's outstretched net and watch his eyes narrow as he inspects its weight. You've heard fringe tales that some gatekeepers secretly tipped the scales or hid extra wooden tokens in the peels of onions to inflate counts, though official records never confirm this. Such stories, whether true or rumour, make your stomach churn as you pay the toll and hurry through. Just beyond the gate, you pause to secure your goods with fresh rope, only to discover one coil has frayed to threads. You curse under your breath and swap it for a sturdier length, mindful that a snapped rope mid-caravan could send your barrels tumbling into mud. You promise yourself to buy rope in bulk next time, though you suspect you'll still end up with 2 rolls of tangled twine. A quirky tidbit suggests some merchants carried hidden spools of silk thread to repair sacks in the field, sewing tears so deftly that even customs officials couldn't spot the patch. You climb back onto your cart, gripping the reins of a weary mare named Marigold, whose sides heave with exhaustion. Just last spring, an English merchant wrote that his pack animal collapsed under a sudden load of wine barrels, forcing him to abandon 2 casks in the forest, an anecdote that underscores how spoilage and loss began at departure. Historians still argue whether merchants bore such perils alone, or relied heavily on hired guides and local permits. But either way, preparing for departure demanded both resources and nerve. As the town's silhouette fades behind you, wooden palisades giving way to open fields, you smell fresh earth and distant smoke from farmhouses. The road narrows to a grassy track, rutted by cartwheels and hoof prints. You tighten the lashings on your spice chest. Inside, peppercorns that command fortunes in distant courts, and feel your pulse quicken. The further you venture from home, the fewer familiar faces remain to help shoulder risk. Do you remember that warm hearth you left behind? Its glow is replaced by midges swirling in your lantern light, biting at your neck as you press on. Each misstep in packing or forgetting a permit can cost weeks of profit. A mainstream fact, in 14th century Genoa, merchants were required to carry a passaporto permit signed by consuls before leaving the harbour, lest their cargo be seized as contraband. Historians still argue whether these passports protected merchants or empowered corrupt clerks to extort bribes. The sky darkens with scudding clouds, promising rain that could turn the track into a slippery trap. You heft your satchel, a ledger bound in goatskin, feeling its weight of numbers and contracts, each entry a lifeline or a noose. A quirky tidbit whispers that some shrewd merchants inscribed hidden codes in their ledgers, so that if a rival stole a book, the cipher would render the deals meaningless. You muse that your own handwriting is messy enough to serve as code without intention. You urge Marigold onward, the wheel sinking into soft earth, and wonder how many merchants never made it past this first stage. Departures were marked by prayers, offerings to saints, and maybe even a spilled vial of port as a sacrifice to fortune. You tuck your cloak tighter, the fabric damp, and brace for the unknown road ahead. Your cart disappears into the gathering darkness, and with each clop of hooves, the security of home slips farther away. In this moment, you understand why departure itself felt like rolling loaded dice. You gamble on weather, on honesty, on fortune itself, before a single coin of profit can ever clink in your purse. You trudge along a narrow forest road, the canopy of oaks and maples overhead pooling shadows around you, and feel a sudden shift in the air. Too quiet, too still. Your mare, Marigold, snorts and stamps, ears flicking toward a thicket. You grip the reins tighter, heart hammering, aware that this stretch of road is notorious for bandit ambushes. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for. Highwaymen in the Middle Ages often targeted lone merchants or small caravans, knowing that the riches of spices, silks, and coin jingling in leather pouches made you a tempting mark. A mainstream fact: in 13th century England, the forests of Barnesdale and Sherwood were infamous haunts of outlaws who preyed upon traders travelling between towns. Historians still argue whether these bandits were merely common robbers or former soldiers turned desperate by war's end. Your cart creaks as you press Marigold forward, toes brushing the earth. Every twig snap sends a jolt through your nerves. You recall whispers of the blacksmith's son, an outlaw rumoured to lead a gang of 5 masked men who would spring from behind trees, their swords glinting in torchlight, or moonlight if the night was clear. You grip your leather satchel, the weight of your ledger shifting as you unsnap its flap, fingers brushing the cold steel of your dagger. You wonder if bandits came with Yelp reviews. 1 star, robbed at dawn, no breakfast offered. Suddenly a shout rings out, a harsh bark, and 2 figures burst onto the road ahead, cloaked in mismatched leathers and carrying heavy clubs. You rein in Marigold, whipping out a small bullseye lantern from your hip. The pale glow reveals 3 more emerging from the underbrush. Your pulse races as you register their crude masks, leather strips tied across narrow eyes. They block your path with insolent bravado. You steady your voice, remembering that boldness could sometimes buy mercy. "Good sirs," you call, "I carry only cloth and oil, nothing of value to your cause." A fringe tidbit flits through your mind. Some bandit bands were said to release merchants unharmed if they offered rare spices, peppercorns as bribes, because spices fetch sweeter coin in black markets than stolen horses did. Whether fact or rumour, you fish a small pouch of pepper from your belt and jingle it. You quip to yourself that your pepper might be the most expensive offering you'll make all year. The lead bandit steps forward, taking the pouch with a sceptical flourish. He crushes a few grains between calloused fingers and breathes deeply. Eyebrows rise in as the heat tickles his nose. "Well," he murmurs, "this is rarer than a church pardon." He tosses the rest back into your hand. "Carry on," he grunts, stepping aside. You exhale, relief flooding your chest, as Marigold darts past. Yet as you pass, you catch a flicker of something in the trees, a hidden bowman raising his weapon. You yank the reins, pivot in your cart to block the bolt. The arrow thuds into the wooden wheel with a splintering crack. Marigold whinnies, lurching sideways, but you shove your foot into the mare's flank and press forward, cart bumping over roots in a desperate sprint. Historians still argue whether most ambushes were opportunistic attacks by small gangs or organised robberies coordinated across regions. You know your survival here likely owes as much to your quick thinking as to the bandits' own indiscipline. As you crash through the last of the undergrowth, the road opens onto a sunlit hill crest. You whip around, heart pounding, and see no sign of pursuit, only the hush of forest reclaiming the underbrush. You pat Marigold's neck, whispering thanks, and check your wheel. The wood cracked but still holds. You retrieve your pepper pouch, now dented but intact, and stuff it back into your satchel. You wonder if you should start a side business selling bandit repellent now with extra pepper. You press onward, sweat mingling with the morning's chill as the road climbs toward a ridgeline. The memory of cloaked faces still tingles in your mind. Every merchant passing through these woods learned to scout ahead with hired guides or local militia scouts, if they could afford it. A mainstream fact, in parts of northern Italy, merchant confraternities pooled resources to hire men-at-arms for safe conduct through bandit-prone territories, paying fees that cut deep into their profits. You tug the reins as the trail levels out and the next village's spire appears on the horizon, its bells tolling midday. Do you remember the warm hearth you left behind? Here, beneath that bell tower, you'll find rest. But you'll never forget the moment wooden shafts and mast faces nearly turned profit into peril. The road glistens with dew, and you realise that every coin you earned must be squared against the risk of ambushes like this. The forest shadows now retreat behind you, filled with silent knowledge. As a medieval merchant, you gamble not just on markets, but on the split-second choices between drawing your dagger or surrendering your wares. You tuck your dagger away and press on, each hoofbeat echoing through the glade. The danger fades, replaced by the promise of open fields and distant trade fairs, but you know bandit ambushes may await at the next bend. And so, with nerves steeled and pepper pouch refilled, you continue your journey, ever vigilant and aware that every mile earned is hard won on roads alive with lurking hands. You guide Marigold's hooves to the riverbank, the afternoon sun glinting off the dark water that ripples against the wooden hull of your barge. You lift the ramp, its creak a welcome change from the forest's hushed tension, and begin offloading cloth bales and barrels of olive oil onto the flatboat. The scent of damp wood mingles with salt on the breeze, and you feel the nervous thrill of river travel, a gambit different from roadways, yet treacherous in its own way. In the Middle Ages, rivers like the Rhine and Danube were vital trade arteries but also hunting grounds for riverine raiders, a common threat to merchants who relied on waterborne conveyance. A mainstream fact, in the late 14th century, the notorious robber barons of the Upper Rhine constructed makeshift fortifications along narrow river bends, launching raids on passing convoys and charging exorbitant passage fees. Historians still argue whether these barons acted with tacit imperial blessing to protect borders, or simply exploited the crown's weakness to enrich themselves. You scribble a quick note in your ledger, barge hired, river toll paid, and hoist another crate aboard. The boat rocks gently, and the current tugs at its prow, urging it downstream. Midway between two wooded banks, you spot a battered longboat drifting in the shallows ahead, its single mast snapped and crew nowhere in sight. Your heart hammers as you realise these waters are patrolled not just by brigands on shore, but by floating predators who will board any vessel invitingly laden with goods. You wonder if these river pirates offer loyalty cards. Raid a punch card. Get your 10th cargo free. You steady the barge against the current, scanning the opposite bank's tree line. Surely, raiders lie hidden among the reeds, ready to pounce. The water sloshes against the hull, and you imagine hideouts carved into riverbanks, caves concealed by overgrowth where pirates stockpiled seized wares. A quirky tidbit flutters through your mind. Some fringe accounts claim that on the lower Danube, bandits trained otters to slip aboard barges under cover of darkness, untying ropes and sabotaging cargo. Whether true or fanciful, the notion makes your pulse skip. You clutch the rail and call to your deckhand, a wiry fellow named Jakob. "Keep your dagger within reach," you whisper. He nods, eyes darting to the opposite shore where a wooden ladder leans at an angle against a crumbling embankment. The raft's lone mast groans as a breeze catches its frayed sail. You cross yourself, a habit from home, and grip your dagger's hilt beneath your tunic while Jakob hefts a length of chain. Historians still argue whether merchants relied more on fearsome reputations or on hired soldiers to deter river raids, but you know both options eat into profit margins. Today, you've paid both the guild's war chest and the local mercenary captain for safe passage, yet uncertainty clings like damp clothing. The river's tone shifts as you near a sharp bend. Trees arcing overhead form a canopy that dims the light, and you strain your ears for unexpected splashes. Suddenly, a shout echoes from upstream, a low, guttural cry that reverberates against mossy stones. Your blood runs cold as 3 longboats slide into view, oars slicing water in unison, their decks crowded with leather-armoured raiders. You shove Jakob aside and seize a length of rope. "Hold fast," you bark. He braces against the rail, chain in hand. Ahead, the raiders' leader, a hulking man with a bear-pelt cloak, raises his axe and howls. He signals his men, who lean in, row faster, and surge towards your barge like wolves closing in on prey. You think maybe you should have paid extra for that anti-raider spray after all. Your mind races. The riverbanks are too steep to beach safely, the current too swift to backpaddle. You glance at the merchant code stamped on your crates. Perforata, indicating fine Venetian glass, and realise the temptation. If the raiders board, they'll smash every glass pane and sell the fragments as curiosities before looting your spices. You take a deep breath, channeling every lesson learned, leap onto the deck, swing the weighted end of your chain, and create a makeshift portcullis to slow boarding. "Jakob, unhook the netting traps," you hiss. He yanks at hooks hidden beneath the stalls, releasing thick nets rigged to drop across the prow. A cascade of rope and iron links clatters over the bow, trawling the water between you and the first longboat. The raiders jerk their oars to a halt, swords raised, but their longboat skids to a jarring stop against the snare. 2 men topple into the river, splashing. The cries echo along the shore, mingling with your hammering heart. You see chests and barrels trembling under the strain of nets, your cargo holding firm for now. Historians still argue whether such net defences were widely employed or rare improvisations by enterprising merchants. But you know the sight of tangles in oars is worth a king's ransom in minutes bought. Jakob slams chains into the water, the clang reverberating through to the pirates, their war cries turning to curses. You heft a barrel of olive oil and roll it forward, aiming its iron hoop toward the stopped longboat's deck. The barrel plunges like a cannonball, scattering men and shattering their cover. The boarders scrabble for balance, soaked in oil that slicks their boots. You seize the moment, closing the gap with Jakob brandishing your dagger. You muse that you've always been told to oil the wheels, not the opponent's boots. Behind you, the barge's crew, 2 labourers who insisted on joining for the promise of payday, lift crates to form a barricade. Splinters fly as they swing timbers, turning your flatboat into a fortress. The raiders muster for a second wave, but hesitate at the ruined longboat's side, unwilling to wade into oil-slicked chaos. You plant your feet, chest heaving, sweat mingling with river mist. "Tell them to stand down," you shout. Jakob barks back through clenched teeth. The raid leader narrows his eyes, appraising your improvised citadel. After tense moments, he signals a retreat. The men shove oars into water, rowing backward, leaving you triumphant yet shaken. You exhale, relief flooding in as the river's flow carries the raiders out of sight. The nets catch water weeds and a stray boot. but your cargo remains intact. You pat Jakob on the back, offering a grateful nod. The longboats vanish around the bend, their echoes swallowed by the rush of current. A mainstream fact: records from Venetian merchants note that only 1 in 5 river convoys survived unscathed, with losses from raids rivaling those from storms at sea. The cost of your nets, mercenary fees, and quick thinking may swallow as much as 1/10 of your profit. Yet here, alive and unlooted, you grasp the precarious balance of reward and risk on medieval rivers. You reset the ramp, dragging the nets back aboard, and breathe in the crisp, water-scented air. The river stretches ahead, deceptively calm once more. You reposition your linens and spices, checking barrel seals, and whisper a prayer of thanks to Saint Nicholas, patron of sailors and travellers. The current catches the barge's bow, and you pull at the oar, resuming your downstream voyage. Do you remember how it felt to haul your cart through forests only moments ago? Now, you've learned that river raids demand both guile and grit. The water may carry you swiftly toward markets, but it also harbours hidden threats, those who strike when you least expect it and vanish like ghosts. As the banks open to rolling plains, you allow yourself a cautious smile. Your goods remain safe, your crew unharmed, yet you know this victory is only one of many you'll need. Rivers are the lifeblood of trade, but they're also the domain of raiders waiting for any sign of weakness. You grip your oar, resolve stealing in your veins, and press on toward the distant port where harbour dues and new dangers await. You step onto the creaking deck of the cog at dawn, salty breeze tangling your hair as gull cries echo across glassy waves. The dock's ropes sigh free, and the ship's timbers groan beneath your boots. Below deck, crates of wine slosh gently, filling the hull with the tang of oak and ferment. As you climb the gangplank for the open sea, heart pounding, you sense the world beyond riverbanks, vast, unpredictable, and alive with hidden perils. In the medieval era, sea travel was as essential as it was dangerous. A mainstream fact: chroniclers of the 15th century record that at least 1 in every 4 merchant vessels was lost to storms, wrecked on unseen shoals or dashed against jagged cliffs. Historians still argue whether coastal lighthouses or improved charts would have reduced losses, but either way, early mariners faced the sea with little more than compass, lead line, and prayer. You steady yourself against the rail, sea spray stinging your cheek, as the cog clears the harbour mouth and pitches into rolling swells. The sky is a shifting quilt of slate-grey clouds, promising sudden squalls. You grip the rail, knuckles white, while the crew hauls on wet ropes to reef the sails before the wind can snatch them. You wonder if there's a medieval Yelp for storm warnings. 3 stars, ship nearly sank, but the view is dramatic. Below, in the hold, your crates of olive oil, glassware, and fine cloth clatter as the vessel lurches. You rush below to secure each chest with extra lashings, sweat slicking your brow despite the chill. A salty draught whistles through cracks in the planking. As you tighten a rope around a barrel, you recall fringe lore of submerged sea demons supposed to lurk off Brittany's coast, capsize ships with unseen currents, and drag cargo into brine-soaked depths. Whether myth or mariner's tale, the thought makes your breath catch. You hurry above and shout to the helmsman, "Mind the quartering seas." He nods, eyes fixed on the horizon. Quartering seas, waves striking at a 45-degree angle, could send the cog yawing or, worse, deliver a deadly knockdown. A quirky tidbit. Some sailors inscribed small crosses on their boots to ward off knockdowns, believing holy symbols would steady the ship's spirit. As the wind builds to a howl, the cog heels over, its oak planks creaking like ancient hinges. Water sluices across the deck, pooling near the hatchway. You slosh through knee-deep spray to secure the foremast halyard, the rope whipping your hands. You muse that if medieval ships had cup holders, This voyage would be rated chaotic turbulence. The sky darkens to an inky bruise, and a sudden gust shatters the calm. Canvas billows like a living creature, and one sail rips with a deafening tear. The crew scrambles, swapping sail for storm canvas. Patched linen dyed black and weaker than the original. You feel each crash of the mast through your ribs as the cog plunges into a trough. Historians still argue whether medieval storm sails actually improved survivability or simply delayed the inevitable. But captains prized every scrap of fabric that could be lashed on in bad weather. You haul at a rope, chafed palms bleeding through your gloves, and pray the makeshift sail holds. A wave rises like a wall of steel water and smashes over the bow, washing you over to the lee side. You bite back a curse, gripping a belaying pin to keep from sliding. The deck slants alarmingly. Your boots struggle for purchase on the soaked planks. You force yourself to breathe steadily. Too many inhaled mouthfuls of salt spray risk pneumonia come November. On the quarterdeck, the captain shouts orders. "Lower the yards! Ease the sheets!" The crew obeys in lurching unison, and the ship shivers as the mainsail slackens. The roaring wind becomes a low rumble, and the cog shudders like a wounded beast. You think that next time you'll remember to pack Dramamine, or its 14th century equivalent, a handful of divinely blessed herbs. As the storm peaks, you catch sight of breakers towering on the horizon, water spouts formed by violent air currents. The ship's bow plunges into a trough, and the rail slides beneath the foam. You brace yourself as water surges up, nearly sweeping you overboard. Instinctively, you pivot and lunge for the rail, fingers slipping on cold iron. The deck pitches again, tossing you to your knees. Your mind flashes to tales of merchant ships found months later, crewless and drifting like ghosts, cargo intact but crew vanished, swallowed by sea or swept into madness by isolation. You steady yourself and rise, collaring your cloak to block the spray, and check your watch, 2 hours into the gale. Gradually, the wind begins to abate, dropping from gale to a snarling gale force 6. The cog rights itself, cresting a final wave, then rolls gently in the leftover swell. The sea's surface turns glassy again, dappled with sinking rain. You loosen your grip, breathing hard as your heartbeat slows. The patched storm sail holds, and the hull remains sealed. You look around at the weary crew, faces drawn, eyes hollow but alive. Below, you reopen the hold and find one crate split, but most could secure under wet tarps. Your wine barrels have leaked a third of their contents, but a portion survives. You note the loss in your ledger, a bitter reminder that sea voyages devour cargo whether by wave or by tear. A mainstream fact, 16th century Venetian merchants often employed storm insurance, paying an extra premium to maritime insurers who'd cover losses up to half the cargo's value if a voyage encountered a confirmed storm. Historians still argue whether these early policies genuinely mitigated risk or simply encouraged riskier routes by merchants chasing bigger profits. The sun breaks through ragged clouds, illuminating a rainbow arcing across the swell. You inhale the bracing air, tasting freedom and relief. Though your profits will shrink, you're alive, and your goods, battered but mostly intact, will still fetch coin. The hush of calm laps at your nerves, and you realise that surviving a storm at sea is less about skill than about endurance, luck and a sturdy hull. You secure the storm sail for repair and take the helm, guiding the cog on a course away from the shallows and toward a friendly port. The wind now fills the sail gently, tugging you onward. You wipe salt from your eyes and carve a small cross into the deck rail, your own token against future storms. And so, as you steer toward open horizons, you understand that stormy seas are the crucible in which medieval merchants honed their mettle, learning that every voyage is a dance with nature's fury, and that safe harbour is the greatest prize a mariner can win. You trudge down the wide stone causeway that marks the border between two feuding lordships, the morning mist clinging to your cloak like a damp promise. Before you stands a squat stone tower, its arrow-slit windows dark and watchful. A wooden barrier spans the road, flanked by grim-faced soldiers who glare at your laden cart as if you're a trespasser. This is the political toll booth, a grim checkpoint where local lords assert their authority, and your purse trembles at the thought of their demands. You tighten your grip on the reins, feeling every knot and groove beneath your fingers. A mainstream historical fact: throughout medieval Europe, tolls, known as piges in France or maut in German realms, were a primary revenue source for territorial rulers, with duties often assessed per wagon axle or length of cargo. Historians still argue whether these tolls fostered infrastructure improvements or served as mere rent-seeking tools that stifled commerce. The sergeant at the booth steps forward, his mail clinking. "State your cargo and destination," he demands, voice low and rasping. You open your ledger, the pages damp at the corners, and recite. 40 bolts of woolen cloth, 10 kegs of olive oil, bound for the market at Hybra. He squints, nods once, then signals 2 scribes to unfurl parchment rolls where they calculate duties by hand, bolt length, oil volume, even the weight of your pack horse's tack. You half expect them to tax the horse's tail hair next. As the scribe's quills scratch, the sergeant tilts his head, eyeing your pepper pouch. "Spices," he growls. You nod, and he smirks, a dangerous tilt, and adds a special tariff for luxury goods. You watch the tally rise, a sum that could wipe out your margin before you even enter the next county. You swallow, recalling fringe accounts of toll collectors who secretly pocketed extra coin, then reported lower totals to their lord, profiting in the shadows. Your breath hitches as one scribe pounds his fist, declaring an additional levy for imported textiles, though your cloth was woven just over the border. When you protest, he jabs a quill at the margin. "By order of Lord Falkenhayn's latest decree." The parchment bears a seal, an eagle clutching a lightning bolt, proof that the law is stacked against you. Historians still argue whether shifting feudal edicts were genuine attempts at fair revenue or cynical devices to extract tribute from vulnerable traders. You ponder drafting your own decree. All tolls must be paid in ale. You empty your coin purse onto the scribe's board, gleaming pennies and silver deniers clinking like miniature church bells. The sergeant nods when the final sum lands heavy on the table, a toll equal to 4 days' profit on this haul. You press the coins toward him, feeling each piece burn your palm, as if the metal itself resents the transaction. A breeze stirs the pennants above the tower, their colours faded by sun and wind. You glance up, noticing the fraying edges, an apt metaphor for contracts that unravel under pressure. You tuck the now lighter purse back into your belt and secure the reins, willing your heart to calm. A quirky tidbit. Some itinerant merchants whispered of a secret toll-free road, an old smuggler's path winding through marshland and wooded glades, mapped only in rumour and scribbled graffiti on tavern walls. Few dared test it, fearing swamp devils or worse, the Lord's hunters. Whether it existed or not remains a tantalising legend. You push your cart forward as the barrier clatters open, the sergeant lowering his visor in a silent salute of sorts. You oblige, bowing your head, aware that courtesy here buys at least a moment's mercy. Historians still argue whether the long network of toll booths ultimately knitted Europe together by funding roads and bridges, or whether it balkanised commerce into petty fiefdoms. You trundle past the tower, its shadow receding, and exhale, feeling both relief and indignation. Your goods remain whole, but your purse feels hollow. Beyond the tower, the road descends into rolling hills dotted with villages, each awaiting your wares and your newly diminished earnings. You recall the hearth you left behind. Its warmth seems distant now, replaced by the relentless accounting of feudal claims. Do you remember the pepper that saved you from bandits? Now, the same spices cost you extra coin as a sign of status. Such is the medieval merchant's paradox. Profit hinges on navigating a labyrinth of lordly demands as treacherous as any highway ambush. You press onward, Marigold's hooves clicking on sunlit stones, each step echoing a single truth. In this world, every mile brings a new taxman or toll booth, and being a merchant means wagering your livelihood against the caprices of every petty lord you meet. You pause on a rise overlooking a small market town, its timbered stalls lined with hastily carved signboards advertising ale, cheese, and coarse linens. You dismount Marigold and lean against your cart, finger tracing the worn leather of your coin pouch. In your hand, one silver groschen gleams dully beside a clipped penny farthings, their edges jagged where local mint masters shave tiny slivers for personal profit. This is currency chaos, coinage so inconsistent that every transaction becomes a gamble on value itself. A mainstream historical fact. In late medieval Europe, over 150 distinct coin types circulated, from English groats to Florentine florins, each minted to different weights and purities, forcing merchants to constantly reweigh and test every piece. Historians still argue whether the profusion of coinages spurred economic innovation or simply bred profiteering by unscrupulous money changers. You dig into your satchel for your jeweller's touchstone, a small black stone used to verify silver content, and scrape a thin sliver from the groschen. The resulting streak is pale, indicating high silver content, but the clipped penny farthing yields a dull streak, betraying heavy alloy. You tuck both coins away, sighing at the thought of further losses. Historians still argue whether standardised coinage under royal control would have stabilised trade or concentrated too much power in sovereign hands. You wonder if there's a medieval ATM that spits out perfectly minted coins, or just a peasant with a hammer waiting to clip them. You step into the market square, where a weathered money changer sits behind a low table strewn with scales, weights, and small chisels. His booth is shaded by a faded striped awning, and above him hangs a board listing exchange rates scrawled in chalk. Approach him without caution, and you risk overpaying by a thumb's width of silver. You raise your voice politely. "Good master, what's the rate for groschen to florins?" He peers through horn-rimmed spectacles, lips curling. 2 groats to 1 florin, less exchange fee. He flicks a feathered quill at you, plus 1 penny for testing. You nod, sliding 2 groats into his palm. The quill-scrawled rate seems fair until you remember that mere days ago, the rate stood at 1 3/4. You swallow and agree, knowing that delays in changing at larger city mints could cost you days in lost travel time. A quirky tidbit. Some fringe accounts claim that in the Champagne fairs merchants use secret cipher symbols on coins to indicate suspect mintings, tiny crosses or dots invisibly applied so savvy traders could reject bad money on sight. Whether real or rumour, the idea reveals how merchants adapted to chaotic currency landscapes. You accept a freshly weighed pouch of florins, the coins clinking satisfyingly, then hand over a clipped groat for testing. The changer grunts approval and stamps a small wax seal on your ledger, proof of a legitimate exchange. You reattach the pouch to your belt and remount Marigold, mindful that every coin you carry might require scrutiny before use. As you roll away, you recall that in some regions, authorities issued token coins in times of shortage, copper discs stamped with crude designs, intended to circulate by decree rather than intrinsic value. Mainstream fact. In 14th century England, the emergency note coinage of Edward III circulated widely, but its reduced silver content caused widespread distrust and hoarding. Historians still argue whether such token issues were necessary wartime measures or reckless experiments that undermined public confidence. You muse that if only you'd found an enchanted purse that standardised coin values, life would be simpler. Though enchanted purses tend to be expensive, your journey continues through rolling vineyards where local vintners pay tithes in kind. barrels of wine assessed by magistrates with measuring rods called elwans. You barter your florins for a cask to offer as a gift at the Duke's manor, only to find the vintner's blade-like measuring rod slightly longer than the official standard, netting him extra coin. You smile wryly as you consent. Haggling over a few gourds of wine is cheaper than waiting for a royal inspection. A quirky tidbit. In some Italian city-states, coin minters added trace elements like copper or tin as hallmarks to prove origin, allowing merchants to trust foreign coins despite varying silver content. Early proto-counterfeiting measures that doubled as quality assurances. By dusk, you reach a crossroads where 4 toll roads converge, each governed by different lords demanding payment in specific coin types. One insists on pennies of Toulouse, another on Parisian deniers, the third on Genoese soldi, and the last on ducats. You juggle multiple pouches, each labelled with a coloured string, red for proprie, blue for florins, green for soldi, fearing you will hand over the wrong currency and spark a delay or fine. Historians still argue whether such regional monetary fragmentation fostered local autonomy or hamstrung emerging long-distance commerce. For you, the complexity feels like a constant tax on your time and sanity. You finally pay the requisite coins, florins at one booth, soldi at another, and push your cart onto the winding road beyond. Marigold's breath steadies as she trots down a pine-lined avenue, and you exhale the tension in your shoulders. The clink of mixed coins at your belt is a reminder that profit is always filtered through the alchemy of currency. You chuckle at the notion of a single silver coin that magically converted itself to local tender, though you suspect such wizardry would trigger church investigations. As night falls, you camp beneath a sky of shimmering stars, the coin pouches laid out on a cloth beside your bedroll. You count them once more, weighing the balance of each type by eye and by feel. In this world, currency chaos is a constant companion. Your profits rise and fall not only on sales but on fluctuating rates, clipped edges, and the next toll collector's whim. You close your eyes to the rustle of leaves and distant owl calls, the mixed weight of coins a strange lullaby against your chest. You'll face more challenges by dawn, but for now, you rest in the uncertain comfort that at least you hold the right mix of coin, until the next town's money changer decides otherwise. You trudge into the bustling market hall, the air thick with haggling voices and the scent of fresh bread mingling with spilled ale. Stalls stretch in neat rows beneath a vaulted timber roof, each booth a stage for the same drama, merchants calling out prices, buyers squinting at coins, and guild enforcers watching every exchange like hawks. Here, in the heart of commerce, you feel the invisible hand tightening around your throat as powerful guilds collude to fix prices and bar outsiders from profit. A mainstream fact. In many medieval cities, London, Paris, and Florence among them, guilds regulated trades by establishing fixed price lists for common goods, from coarse woolen cloth to cured hams, under pain of fines or expulsion. Historians still argue whether these price controls protected consumers from unscrupulous competition or smothered innovation by privileging established insiders. You approach the fabric stall of the Weavers' Guild, where bolts of dyed wool gleam in deep reds and vibrant greens. The master weaver, serious-eyed and robed in guild colours, insists your fine English broadcloth cannot fetch more than 12 pence per ell, below what you hope to charge. You counter gently, noting your cloth's superior thread count. But he shakes his head, lips pressed thin. His apprentice hovers nearby, pen poised to record any deviation from the official rate. You wonder if guild masters keep a secret scoreboard. Weaver Guild, price-fixing champions, 12 years running. You glance at the board behind him, a meticulously handwritten chart listing dozens of cloth varieties with their mandated prices. Even a slight mark-out or added flourish feels like a rebellion against ancient accords. With reluctance, you nod and hand over a silver groat, accepting that gilded freedom is a luxury only insiders enjoy. Wandering deeper, you pass the spice merchant's enclave, Here, a small cabal of traders, cinnamon, clove, saffron specialists whisper among themselves, then raise their voices in unison when a newcomer steps up. You watch as they quote an eye-watering rate for ginger, then exchange knowing glances. A single trader dares to offer a slightly lower price. The others pivot as one and turn their backs, forcing him into silence. A quirky tidbit. Some fringe accounts claim that certain spice guilds employed caged parrots trained to screech and harass any merchant who dared undercut the cartel's price, though no official record acknowledges parrot-related methods. You catch a whiff of pepper and consider your own small stash. If you sold it at guild rate, your profit vanishes. If you undercut, you risk a costly fine or confiscation. You sheath your dagger between your ribs, recalling that some merchants hid illegal spices in false-bottom barrels to trade outside guild eyes. Historians still argue whether clandestine trading networks eroded guild power over time, or simply fueled more stringent regulations as authorities sought to maintain order. You slip a small pouch of pepper into your inner pocket, heart pounding at the thought of breaking the unspoken code. Moving on, you pass a booth where the Baker's Guild enforcer looms. His large ledger lists the maximum price for a loaf of rye bread, 3 farthings, and he wags a heavy finger at a baker who dared raise his price to 4. The baker lowers his voice to a whisper as the enforcer stamps the ledger, a fine for price gouging, payable in loaves of bread delivered at dawn. The shocked baker's apprentices stare wide-eyed, shifting sacks of flour like they've just watched a public execution of free enterprise. You quip that perhaps the baker should offer bread futures to lock in prices, though you suspect the guild would outlaw that too. Everywhere you look, guild banners hang above stalls, each symbol a promise of quality and an implicit threat. Pay our price or pay the price. The smell of roasting meat from the butcher's alley tempts you, but their own price-fixing scheme means pork costs more than a day's labour. You consider slipping behind their stalls to buy secretly from a disreputable butcher rumoured to bribe guild officers. Scholars still debate whether guild-imposed monopolies fostered community standards or entrenched greed among a privileged few. As you navigate the cramped aisles, you feel both gratitude for the quality assurance guilds offered and frustration at how they throttle independent merchants like you. You pause by the fishmonger's lane, where salted herring and fresh cod glisten on ice. The Fishers' Guild sets a sliding scale. Coastal towns get seafood cheaper, inland buyers pay a premium. You discover their chart tucked inside an ornate wooden box, sealed with wax and guarded by 2 hefty porters. You knock and present your merchant's badge. They unlock the box with ceremonious slowness. The scale's numbers cause your stomach to twist. The inland markup could consume half your expected profit. A quirky tidbit. Fringe tales speak of a rival fishmonger who once paid a bribe to swap the scaled board for a counterfeit listing, only to be caught when local monks compared their own copies. The monks reportedly turned it into a comedic play during Lent. You imagine the monks selling tickets for that play, the Great Herring Heist, a guild tragedy in 3 acts. You count your options, comply with the markup, sneak a hidden crate of dried fish past the porters, or forego fish altogether. Choosing compliance. You chalk the extra cost onto your ledger and vow to recoup it at the next border. By midday, you feel the tug of conflicting loyalties. Guilds preserve standards yet strangle competition. They grant you credibility yet chain you to their rates. As you leave the hall, Marigold whinnies, longing for open fields devoid of human-made constraints. You pat her neck and murmur, "We'll find freer markets yet." Outside, you unstrap your pepper pouch and toss it lightly to the mare. It bounces thrice and lands in the dust. You smile, remembering that while guilds may dominate these aisles, the world beyond still holds opportunities for those daring enough to navigate market manipulation. And so you press on, a wary merchant in a guild-bound town, mindful that every profit is a conquest won against collective power, and every step forward demands both respect for tradition and a willingness to bend the rules. You trudge down a dusty lane flanked by granaries and wine bodegas. The scent of fermenting grapes heavies in the afternoon heat. Your cart's wheels crunch over stray barley grains spilled from sacks, and you eye the barrels of salted herring rattling at the rear. Every step reminds you that spoilage and loss lurk in every crate and cask, a threat as relentless as bandits or storms. A mainstream fact: in medieval trade, as much as 1/3 of perishable cargo, grains, wine, fruits, was lost to spoilage, leakage, or vermin before reaching market. Historians still argue whether greater investment in insulated wagons and barrel linings would have significantly reduced these losses, or simply driven up costs beyond most merchants' means. You pause by a weathered wine cask, its wooden staves bulging and oozing sticky red seepage. A quick prod with a hooked tool sends a trickle of sour wine dribbling onto the cobblestones. You cringe. This cask, meant for wealthy patrons, has spoiled in the relentless sun. You mark a loss in your ledger, the red ink an unwelcome reminder of profits slipping through warped wood. You wonder if there's a medieval cure for bad wine. Chant 3 psalms, and it's almost drinkable. Further along, you inspect your cloth bundles. A recent rainstorm pooled in the cart's slats, soaking the lowest bolts of fabric and leaving them stained with muddy ripples. You peel back the top layer of wool and gasp at the mildew creeping along the seams, dark, fuzzy patches that will turn your pristine broadcloth into worthless rags. You note a loss. 2 bolts ruined. A quirky tidbit. Some fringe historians claim sharper merchants carried small beeswax candles to seal barrel bungholes better, using melted wax to plug tiny leaks before they worsened, though few official records mention such makeshift repairs. Your stomach knots as you recall the salted herring, your last shipment of fish to this inland fare, now vulnerable to stench and infestation. You unlatch a crate and find flies feasting on a split barrel, maggots writhing among the silver coins you drop behind the barrels for safekeeping. You clench your teeth and scoop out the worst of the herring, tossing them into a gutter. Historians still argue whether medieval merchants relied more on salting, smoking, or spiced brine to preserve fish and meat, or if most perishables simply didn't survive the journey. You resolve to buy extra salt at the next town, even if it adds weight to your cart. As you move on, you hear the squeak of a rat darting beneath your cart. You set a small wooden trap, baited with cheese, hoping to curtail rodent raids before they devour more of your goods. You muse that at least rats are honest thieves, never bargaining for a share. Mid-afternoon sun vanishes beneath rolling clouds, and you duck into a thatched-way in courtyard. Beneath a low awning, you prop open your damaged barrels and bundles, airing them to prevent further mould. The innkeeper, a matronly woman with arms like carved oak, watches you with sympathetic eyes. "Spoilage is the bane of every trader," she says. But waterlogged wood can be charred and reburnished to slow seepage. You raise an eyebrow. "Like a blacksmith's touch," she smiles. "Char the staves, then coat with pitch. May save what's left." A mainstream fact: pitch and tar coatings were sometimes applied to barrels and crates to seal them against water, though overuse made goods taste of resin. Historians still argue whether such methods extended shelf life enough to justify the taint. You imagine future vintners marketing barrel-aged in pitch as a bold new flavour profile, though you're not eager to taste it. You pay the innkeeper in small silver deniers for her pitch and borrow a hot poker. As you crouch by the courtyard hearth, you char each barrel stave's exterior until it blackens, then brush on fresh pitch. Sparks fly, and the pungent smoke curls upward, mingling with the smell of roasting onions from the kitchen. By twilight, your repairs are complete. The barrels hiss as they cool, and you hope the pitch seal's old leaks. You bundle the cloth higher in the cart to keep it off the damp planks, and hang a herring crate under a tarp, trusting the flies will move on. You slip a handful of dried mint beneath the cloth, to mask any musty odour in case buyers sniff. Scholars still debate whether such ad hoc repairs and odour masking survived muster in discerning markets, or simply delayed the inevitable condemnation of tainted goods. You tuck your tools away and remount Marigold, sore knees reminding you how little comfort a night's rest brings. As you leave the inn's lantern glow behind, you glance at the sky, wondering if dawn will reveal fresh losses or unlikely salvation. The road stretches ahead, and spoilage's spectre rides with you, an ever-present reminder that vigilance in preservation is as vital as vigilance against thieves. And so, with patched barrels and salted resolve, you continue your journey, knowing that every mile promises new buyers, but only if your goods survive the long, perilous road. You trudge through the morning mist, the scent of damp earth and overturned soil heavy on the breeze, and guide Marigold toward a narrow village crossroads where a cluster of cloth merchants hawk bolts of linen and wool. As you pass, you hear coughs and see pale faces pressed against cart flaps, reminders that disease hitches rides in every shipment. Your stomach tightens. Plague and fever travel as stealthily as any bandit, carried on textiles, rodents, even pack animals. A mainstream fact: in the 14th century, the Black Death spread along trade routes, killing an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population. Rats and their fleas infested cloth bales and grain sacks, transmitting Yersinia pestis as merchants moved goods relentlessly from town to town. Historians still argue whether quarantine measures, cordons sanitaires, effectively slowed contagion or merely displaced it to less regulated regions. You unlatch a wooden chest of fine tapestry, its velvet surface a feast for hidden vermin, and pry open the lid. A plume of dust and motes drifts skyward, carrying the faint, sickly tang of decay. You cough once, startled, and wave the air before your face. The tapestry's intricate stitching might conceal rat droppings, lice, or the dormant eggs of pests, capable of hatching long after you arrive at market. You tuck your scarf up over your mouth, more instinct than courtesy. You wonder if medieval merchants carried tiny fly swatters for your insectile inconvenience. Further along, you pass a peasant woman clutching her child to her chest, her cheeks sunken and eyes shadowed. She begs you to leave some cloth for her dying husband, claiming he cannot afford even a threadbare shroud. You think of the hidden cargo, wool flecked with rat fur and fleas, and hesitate. Mercy tugs at your heart, but fear of contagion stiffens your spine. You slide a strip of coarse linen across the cart's edge, whispering a blessing. A quirky tidbit. Fringe accounts claim some merchants carried small crabapple branches dipped in vinegar, a folk remedy believed to ward off miasma and plague, though its true efficacy is uncertain. Whether these charms saved lives or provided only a placebo, they reveal the human urge to find control amid chaos. You press Marigold onward, entering a walled market town where a makeshift quarantine station, wooden planks marked with red crosses, blocks one gate. A gaunt sentinel waves you through the main entrance, eyeing your goods warily. You note a crude sign reading "Regulated goods only. All textiles must be disinfected." A line of merchants waits to have their cloth fumigated over a smoky brazier. Historians still argue whether medieval fumigation, smoke, vinegar baths, or brine washes actually reduced pathogens or simply spread foul odours and stifled trade. You tug the tapestry chest forward, heart pounding as a leather-clad attendant waves a smoking bundle of rosemary beneath each bolt. The pungent herb stings your nostrils but seems to chase away some of the dank scent. You muse that you'd rather wrestle a weasel than inhale another whiff of burnt herbs. As your goods pass the fumigation hearth, you overhear two merchants arguing heatedly. One accuses the other of skipping the vinegar bath to save time. The other retaliates by labelling him a harbinger of pestilential doom. Your pulse quickens. You've no wish to be blamed for the next outbreak. You drop an extra groat into the attendant's hand to ensure thorough treatment. Beyond the fumigation station, you navigate crowded stalls where rodent traps, A few haggard terriers and woven wicker boxes baited with cheese stand sentinel. You pause to reset a trap that sprung empty, its captive mouse squeaking feebly. The trapkeeper warns you that last week, a single rat slipped past patrols and triggered an outbreak in the granaries. You shudder, recalling that contaminated grain sacks can spread more than hunger. They bring death. A mainstream fact: grain merchants in medieval Italy sometimes dipped sacks in lime water or stored them on raised planks to deter rodents. Yet outbreaks still occurred when sacks touched infested floors. Historians still argue whether these preventive measures were widespread or limited to wealthier merchants who could afford such precautions. Your own sacks sit on low cart slats. You order marigold to kneel so you can lift each onto raised racks, hoping to fend off crawling vermin. The effort leaves your arms trembling, but you'd rather endure soreness than risk disease. You gingerly pat down each sack, listening for rustles that betray hidden pests. You joke that if only you had a portable moat, rats wouldn't dare come within a cart's length. As midday sun retreats, you reach the far side of the market and spot a disposal pit for infested textiles. Charred remnants destined for fire. You toss in the worst damaged bolts, watching them smoulder in a swirl of ash and plague-ridden spores. The attendant waves a broom at you, urging you onward. You dip your head in forced reverence for the flames that, while destructive, guard the living from pestilence. You remount, dusting ash from your boots, and steer toward the exit. The sentinel at the gate records your name and cargo in a ledger, stamping your parchment with a safe passage seal. You tuck the document into your satchel, proof that your goods have been cleansed. Whether it truly protects against disease or merely soothes the fearful, you cannot know. Historians still debate whether medieval quarantine protocols, the first of their kind, laid the groundwork for modern public health, or simply displaced illness to less regulated countryside. You breathe deeply, the chill dusk air a balm after the fumigation's haze. As you guide Marigold through the waning light, you recall the peasant family you left behind and pray your cloth brings them comfort rather than catastrophe. You realise that each bolt you sell carries not only profit, but a responsibility for the health of entire communities. And so you continue on, vigilant against both visible threats and invisible scourges, aware that in medieval trade, surviving disease is as complex and perilous as evading bandits or weathering storms. Your journey presses on, each mile a testament to the fragile balance between commerce and contagion. You rise before dawn, the chill mist curling around your elbows as you unlock the heavy oak chest that holds your ledger and sealed letters of credit. Today you must decide whether to extend credit to a distant buyer in the free city of Lioren, whose merchants you've never met in person. Your palms sweat as you weigh the risks. Trust too freely, and you could be left unpaid for months, or worse, forever. In the late medieval period, merchants commonly used bills of exchange, written orders instructing foreign banks or money changers to pay on their behalf, to extend credit across long distances without carrying coin. Historians still argue whether these instruments fueled the growth of international trade or primarily benefited wealthy bankers who profited from interest and fees. You smooth the vellum of a fresh bill in your hand, ink still drying on its crest and seals. The buyer, Master Peril of Lioren, has requested 20 bolts of fine linen to be delivered in 6 months, with payment due upon receipt. You recall that Perrin's family once failed to repay a loan in Genoa, leaving local merchants nursing losses for years. You hesitate, vision flickering to empty wagons trudging back home, goods unsold and coin unrecovered. You muse that if only there were a medieval credit score. Master Perrin, 450, void lending after midnight. You glance at the clerk beside you, a sharp-eyed youth named Samuel, who taps his quill impatiently. Interest, he asks quietly. You nod, murmuring the customary 5% fee, more than enough to satisfy your goldsmith backers, but low enough to attract Perrin's business. The quill scratches as Samuel inscribes the terms principal sum, fee, due date, and stipulated penalties for late payment. A quirky tidbit. Fringe Tales suggests some enterprising merchants secretly inserted tiny charms, pressed thyme or crushed mint, into credit notes, believing the herbs would ward off bad faith and encourage timely repayment, though no official merchant guild records mention such floral precautions. Next, you call for your leather-bound book of references, flipping to Perrin's entry. Past correspondents note mixed experiences. Some praised his promptness, others cursed week-long delays. You pencil a marginal note. Proceed with caution. Consider partial silver deposit upon dispatch. Historians still argue whether partial payments truly ensured contracts or merely created new burdens on fragile cash flows. You seal the letter of credit with red wax and your signet, imprinting your family mark, a lion rampant in the centre. Beneath the flames glow. You imagine that seal melting should Perrin default, the paper's worth reduced to ash alongside your hopes of profit. You joke that if heirs ever discover unpaid debts in your will, they'll hunt your ghost for repayment. With parchment in hand, you summon your foreman, a wiry veteran named Agnes, and instruct her to load 12 bolts of linen into the barred vault beneath the wagon. The remaining 8 will await deposit of half the payment in a secure chamber of the Leoran banking house, should Perrin's terms prove too risky. Agnes's nimble fingers tie bolted ropes, and she nods thoughtfully, her wrinkled face a map of countless deals gone awry. You step back to study your accounting tables. Extending credit was once an act of faith. Now, it feels like tightrope walking above a pit of hungry wolves. A mainstream fact. By the 15th century, major Italian banking families like the Medicis often assumed merchant debts in exchange for stiff commissions, effectively socialising risk among the elite while isolating default consequences. Historians still debate whether such arrangements democratised credit or merely shifted risk onto less powerful parties. A distant crow caws, and you look toward the darkened barns where your pack animals rest. They will carry your goods across mountain passes and through desert heat to reach Leoran. If Perrin falters, those animals could return laden with unsold cloth, or worse, nothing at all. You flash back to the story of a Florentine merchant whose entire caravan vanished en route to repay a defaulted bill. His creditors seized his home and hounded his family for years. You imagine adding a clause: defaulting buyers must hunt missing caravans on pain of bear's wrestling match. You thrust the sealed letter into your satchel and unsheath your dagger, a reminder that credit disputes sometimes ended in duels or debtors' prisons rather than polite negotiation. Though you hope it never comes to violence, you know the blade's presence fortifies your conviction when words falter. Historians still argue whether legal recourse, looming threats of imprisonment or asset seizure, deterred defaults or simply drove disgruntled debtors to flee across borders. You tuck your dagger away, resolved to depend first on prudence instead of force. At sunrise you whistle for Marigold, and she nuzzles your shoulder as you climb into the driver's seat. The captive cloth lies secure, and the letter of credit glows faintly in your satchel. With reins in hand, you guide the wagon toward the eastern road, where mountain shadows loom. Every mile you venture is a roll of the dice. Trust extended versus trust betrayed. Profit earned versus ruin realised. In this precarious realm of credit pitfalls, you learn that lending is as fraught as any ambush or storm, except failure arrives quietly, through unpaid bills and hollow promises, leaving you to tally losses long after the road has swallowed your hopes. Do you remember the comfort of home before credit demands? Now, each letter of credit is a blade of ambition at your throat, reminding you that in medieval mercantile life, extending goodwill can mean welcoming disaster. You guide Marigold down a winding mountain pass, the morning sun glinting off craggy peaks, and your cart's wheels clatter over cobblestones laid centuries ago. As you near the border town of Verenbach, a wooden archway and 2 ivory-white pillars mark the boundary of the electorate, a realm with its own laws and courts. You feel a familiar tightening in your chest. Legal entanglements here can entrap unwary merchants, turning profitable ventures into costly sagas. A mainstream fact: in medieval Europe, each realm, and often each city, enforced its own commercial laws, from permissible contract formats to prescribed weights and measures. Merchants had to navigate charters, toll exemptions, and bespoke ordinances specific to every jurisdiction. Historians still argue whether this legal patchwork fostered local autonomy or strangled long-distance trade under bureaucratic burdens. You dismount and approach the archway's guardhouse, where two robed magistrates, ink-stained scrolls in hand, await your documents. They demand to see your Charter of Safe Conduct, signed by the Elector's Chancellor, and a certified copy of the trade regulations. You produce both, noting the archivist's seal still crisp. One magistrate squints at the charter, then at your ledger, muttering about outdated clauses. He cites a recent edict revoking all charters older than 3 months unless explicitly renewed. You half joke that charters age worse than cheese, one day fresh, the next day mouldy relics. You produce a second copy, but the magistrate waves it aside. Only originals suffice under the new ordinance. Your heart thumps. Renewing a charter requires travel to the distant chancery in St. Mariere, a 2-day ride by swift horse. Without renewal, you face fines, equivalent to half your cargo's value, and possible seizure of your goods. A quirky tidbit: fringe accounts claim some city councils secretly accepted bribes in the form of rare tapestries or exotic furs to overlook expired charters, though no official record acknowledges such tapestry diplomacy. You glance at Marigold, whose flanks gleam with perspiration. To backtrack for renewal would cost time and feed, and you risk missing the scheduled fair in Verenbach. You wrestle with your options: pay the hefty fine now, petition for an exceptional grace, or press on and risk confiscation. A nearby merchant in silk robes steps forward, offering advice. File an appeal, he whispers, and they may grant a provisional permit until you reach the chancery. But appeals drag on for weeks, he cautions, and you can't afford delays. Historians still argue whether such appeals processes provided genuine legal remedy or served as stalling tactics by authorities to extract more fees. You take a deep breath, recalling that in the Lombard city-states, merchants formed consortia to hire local jurists who specialised in navigating patchwork laws. You weigh the cost. Hiring a legal scribe here would run 2 silver marks, still cheaper than the presiding fine. You nod to the silk-clad merchant and produce a few coins. You muse that hiring scribes is like commissioning medieval lawyers, except they speak Latin and scribble nonsense in tiny loops. Within minutes, a gaunt scribe arrives, a wiry fellow with ink-stained forearms. He unfurls a vellum brief and prepares a petition, a humble request for provisional safe conduct, citing your prompt conduct record and references from prior toll houses. As he writes, you notice his quill dance with practiced certainty, weaving legal citations and polite flattery of the elector's wisdom. You watch the magistrates confer, their scrolls whispering as they pass between them. At length, the senior magistrate nods, accepting the petition. He grants you a stamped provisional trading warrant valid for 15 days, enough to reach St. Marian and renew your charter. You exhale, relief flooding your chest. A mainstream fact: temporary waivers and provisional licenses were common in medieval trade networks, balancing local control with the economic need to keep goods in motion. Historians still argue whether such provisional measures strengthened legal universality or merely perpetuated a system of perpetual fees and dependencies. You secure the warrant to your satchel and thank the merchant in silk robes, offering him a flask of spiced wine from your cargo as a gesture of gratitude. He accepts, his eyes glinting, perhaps calculating future favours. You remount Marigold, the provisional warrant seal pressing against your side like a talisman. Before departing, you pause at a small shrine beside the road, a carved stone relief of Lady Justitia, blindfolded, with scales balanced. You toss a silver penny at its base and whisper a prayer for just laws and merciful magistrates on the roads ahead. The morning sun glints off the penny as it skitters against stone. You joke that bribes to gods are a timeless tradition, though official doctrine insists on pure prayer alone. With your provisional warrant, you guide your cart through the archway and onto Verenbach's bustling market street. The provisional seal buys you time, but not immunity. You must still traverse unfamiliar courts, each with quirks and hidden traps. As you navigate the narrow street, you notice signboards listing local statutes, some as obscure as no wheeled carts in the inner district on Saturdays. You reflect on the thin line between compliance and entanglement. A single overlooked clause can transform a straightforward sale into legal limbo. The interplay of local charters, edicts, and appeals teaches you that medieval merchants are also jurists, scholars of statutes, adept at leveraging every loophole. And so, armed with your provisional warrant and a quick lesson in local law, you press on toward the town square, aware that legal entanglements are as perilous as any bandit ambush, and sometimes even more inescapable. You trudge into the dimly lit back alley behind the merchant quarter, the smell of damp stone and rotting refuse rising from overflowing gutters. Your boots slap on uneven cobbles as you follow a narrow corridor toward the warehouse where you're to meet your business partner, Master Aldrin. In your satchel lies the contract you drafted on fine vellum, terms spelled out in clear Latin, but you can't shake the nagging worry that trust may be as brittle as old parchment, and that Aldrin's smile may conceal a knife. A mainstream fact, in medieval commerce, letters of partnership often carried clauses detailing forged bond penalties, heavy fines or public shaming for any party discovered to have counterfeited the agreement. Historians still argue whether these legal safeguards effectively deterred fraud or merely provided a veneer of security that unscrupulous partners easily bypassed. You slow as you approach the warehouse door, its iron latch slick with moisture. Inside, the torchlight flickers across stacked barrels and woven bales, casting spidery shadows. A figure steps forward, Aldrin's silhouette sharp against the glow of a single lantern. He greets you with a flourish, voice warm as honey, though you notice a glint of calculation in his eye. You grip your satchel's strap, anticipation knotting your gut. "Good friend," Aldrin intones. "I've prepared the goods for our joint venture, Spice Isle silks and new Cypriot wine." His hand rests on the ledger next to the goods manifest. You exhale, relief mingling with suspicion. He gestures to the manifest. You're writing, then offers a loaf of crusty bread and a flask of sweet wine. The aroma of yeast and grapes fills the air. You quip that if Aldrin steals your goods, at least the bread and wine will soften the blow. He pours you a small cup and toasts your partnership. You sip. The wine is sharp but smooth, lingering on your tongue. As you nod, you watch Aldrin's hand slip into a pouch at his belt, too quick for casual adjustment. You suspect he's palming a second contract, one with altered terms. The shadows dance on cracked beams overhead as he unfurls what looks like your original agreement, but the Latin clauses are subtly different, specifying that he may retain the first shipment if profits fall below a certain threshold. A quirky tidbit. Fringe merchants whisper of a mirror contract trick, where a partner creates a reverse-signed document to present in court. Only the cleverest clerics caught the forgery. Whether such mirror contracts were widespread or legendary remains contested. Your heart thumps. You recall scholars still argue whether medieval courts imposed rigorous document authentication, or whether disputes were settled by local magistrates prone to bribery. Either way, forging a signature could leave you flat-footed. You slide your hand beneath your cloak and finger the small iron key there, a backup measure granting you access to a secret guild arbitration chest where you lodged a certified copy of the true contract. You weigh confronting Aldrin now, amid flickering torchlight and damp air, or testing his loyalty with a subtle question. You clear your throat. "Master Aldrin, I trust these terms match our original agreement?" Your voice echoes off the stone walls. He smiles, lips curling, as if expecting the question. "Of course, friend. Every word is as we discussed." He taps the forged contract and winks. You quip that his "of course" sounds about as trustworthy as a rat in a cheese shop. You lean forward, noting the parchment's edge glints unnaturally under lamplight. Modern goat skin, not the old vellum you used. Clever. You pretend to inspect the manifest, then say, "Let's finalise by entering the contract in the guild's arbitration chest. Per custom." His smile falters. I thought that was optional." Historians still argue whether guilds enforced impartial arbitration or functioned as protective cabals favouring insiders. You decide to call his bluff. Optional, but our charter cites the guild's seal as condition precedent. You gesture to the chest in the corner, its iron bands engraved with your guild's emblem. Uldren's jaw tightens. The torch flickers, casting his face in half-shadows. He steps back, voice brittle. "Perhaps we should discuss this elsewhere." He gestures to the warehouse exit, but you block the way, satchel in hand. The bread and wine are forgotten on a dusty crate. You wonder if his idea of "discuss elsewhere" means a dark alley interrogation or an impromptu solo trip home. He lunges, hand darting towards your satchel, but you pivot, drawing the strap across his wrist. The strap burns leather, and he hisses. You seize your chance, yanking the satchel free and brandishing your dagger's hilt beneath your cloak. No need to draw steel, just the threat. Uldren and two hidden accomplices freeze. The one in the shadows raises empty hands, the other skitters back towards stacked barrels, their outlines wavering. Your dagger's edge gleams, catching the lantern's flame. You hiss. "No tricks." The tension snaps as Uldren bows his head. "You win," he snarls. He crouches by the arbitration chest, reaches inside, and retrieves the certified copy of your true contract. He hands it over, his fingers brushing yours. The parchment feels thicker, the ink darker, the seal's intact. You retrieve the original from your satchel, compare clauses by lantern light, exact matches. You allow a curt nod. "Let's sign this one in the guild's presence tomorrow." He swallows, nodding. As you depart the warehouse, the damp night air chills your sweat. You feel the weight of both contract and dagger, a reminder that fraudulent partners can lurk behind every handshake. The torchlight dims behind you as you shepherd Marigold down the alley. Your satchel safe, your trust battered but intact. And so, having outwitted a would-be deceiver, you sense that true commerce demands vigilance not only against external threats, but from those who pledge alliance in the dark. In medieval trade, every partnership is a gamble. Sometimes the greatest risk rides beside you in plain sight. You trudge onto the stone quay, salt air stinging your nostrils as gulls wheel overhead, and stare at the grim sight. A wary armada of war galleys anchored like iron leviathans between your merchant cog and the open sea. Their banners snap in the breeze, crimson crosses, black eagles, and you realise you've sailed into a maritime blockade, where wartime edicts can strand your vessel and fortunes alike. A mainstream fact, in medieval warfare, naval blockades were established by kingdoms such as Aragon and Genoa to choke enemy commerce, with fleets intercepting merchant ships and seizing cargoes as contraband. Historians still argue whether these blockades truly weakened opponents economically or simply diverted trade along more perilous routes, raising prices and prolonging conflicts. Your heart hammers as you approach the blockade line, waving the white flag of truce clipped to your mast as required by custom. A towering galley's captain, a scarred veteran with a metal-braced cap, eyes you through a spyglass, then shouts orders. Two longboats spring from the galley's flanks, oars churning. You clamp the helm and turn your cog's bow toward them, bracing for inspection. You muse that inspected by pirates would make a fine addition to your merchant resume, right after survived bandit pepper bribes. The longboats pull alongside, oars creaking. A marine in chainmail leaps across the gap. sword sheathed but arm poised on the pommel. He demands your cargo manifest and letters of safe conduct. You hand them over, voice steady as your fingers brush the hilt of your dagger beneath your cloak. In your manifest lies precious cargo, cloth, spices, wine, that wartime admiralty might deem enemy goods. The marine frowns, scanning the parchment, then nods curtly and signals his oarsman to haul your cog alongside the galley. You brace as the galley's rail scrapes your hull, envisioning a gash that could sink you. A quirky tidbit. Fringe accounts claim that some blockading fleets use trained cormorants to dive under merchant hulls, slashing nets or ropes to disable ships before boarding, but official logs make no mention of feathered saboteurs. You steady your knees as you step onto the galley's deck. The wood's slick with brine. A stern lieutenant demands to search your hold. You watch each chest pried open, each barrel lid lifted. When he spies your pepper pouches, he grins, a rare sign of favour, and tucks a small sack into his jerk breeches. The rest of your cargo is deemed neutral and allowed to pass, after a hefty inspection fee in silver marks. Historians still argue whether such fees were legitimate admiralty dues or mere extortion in naval guise. You press a pouch of florins into the lieutenant's palm, each coin like a drop of your profit draining away. He nods, satisfied, and signals your release. You joke that next time you'll charge pirates a boarding fee. 2 bolts of cloth per boarding, please. Back aboard your cog, you tally the unexpected levy, 10% of your cargo's declared value. Your stained ledger absorbs each number like a wound. The galleys drift aside, reforming the blockade line as other merchants approach. You sail past in silence, the salt breeze now tasting of resentment. A mainstream fact. During the 100 Years' War, English blockades of French ports led to skyrocketing grain prices inland and chronic food shortages, illustrating how maritime embargoes could devastate civilian populations. Historians still argue whether such strategies achieved decisive military objectives or merely widened the suffering of non-combatants. Your cog's timbers groan as you turn back to sea, anxious eyes scanning the horizon for a break in the naval wall. You consider the legend of a secret channel, an underwater river feeding into hidden coves, known only to smugglers. The thought tempts you, a nighttime dash under the moon, unseen by blockading sails. Yet the risk of rocks or currents stronger than your oak hull chills your resolve. You muse that risky smuggling routes should come with a "survive at your own risk" label, though no merchant has ever sold such thing. You steer northward toward a gap rumoured between 2 reefs, an ancient smuggler's pass called the Serpent's Gate. The charts are vague, the current's treacherous, but beyond lies open water. As you approach, the watchman cries "shallows," and you shove oars into the water to slow. A sudden lurch throws your balance. Marigold whinnies below decks, and you shove back, clearing the shoals by mere inches. Your hull scratches against hidden rocks, but holds. Historians still debate whether such clandestine routes were more legend than fact or critical lifelines sustaining wartime trade. You guide your vessel through a narrow channel, bracing as waves surge against your sides, and emerge into unguarded waters beyond the blockade's reach. Exhausted relief floods you as the enemy galleys shrink on the horizon. You survey your battered cargo, untouched except for the coins you've paid, and exhale. The blockade has cost you time, treasure, and peace of mind. Yet you've learned that maritime blockades, like storms or bandits, are hazards demanding both capital and courage. As you set your sails for the next port, you recall that each mile beyond the naval line is a gamble on charts, currents, and stealth. In medieval trade, open seas offer freedom but also traps laid by martial powers. Your cog creaks forward, the blockade behind you, and you whisper into the wind, onward to profit and peril. You steer your cog into the sheltered bay of Port Sancta, the spires of the cathedral gleaming in the afternoon sun. Lantern-lit quays creak underfoot as you guide Marigold onto a plankway lined with painted pylons bearing the cross of the realm. A patrol of clerical ships, white sails marked with crimson chalices, lies anchored beyond the harbour mouth. Their presence reminds you that religious embargoes can be as binding as any royal decree, forbidding trade in certain goods deemed heretical or impious. A mainstream fact, during the Crusades, papal edicts prohibited trade in luxury silks and spices with Muslim-held ports. Aiming to weaken enemy economies, merchants caught flouting these embargoes faced excommunication and confiscation of goods. Historians still argue whether these bans genuinely starved opposing realms or chiefly enriched church coffers through fines and levies. You step ashore, the damp salt air mingling with incense wafting from the cathedral door. A friar in a charcoal habit approaches, his rosary beads clicking with each step. He presents a parchment scroll, the latest papal bull outlawing trade in all manner of Eastern pepper and incense. Your prize sacks of black pepper, worth fortunes in distant markets, now rest under ecclesiastical penalty. You muse that pepper spray embargo would have a very different meaning today. The friar's eyes narrow as he demands to inspect your hold. You lead him below deck, where rows of spice barrels and resin jars gleam like treasure. He runs his finger along one barrel's staves, sniffing deeply. "Holy Father," he intones, "these wares must be surrendered or condemned to divine fire." You swallow, recalling that excommunication could bar you from every Christian port until penance was paid. A quirky tidbit. Fringe rumours speak of secret monasteries deep in the Alps that preserved smuggled incense in hidden crypts, burning small censers at Easter to maintain the aroma of forbidden spices, though no official monastic record confirms this clandestine devotion. You recall historians still debate whether embargoes reflected genuine moral concern or were opportunistic campaigns to monopolise church-sanctioned trade. Either way, you face the choice: comply and sacrifice your pepper's value, or defy and risk ecclesiastical wrath. You step back onto the deck, palms slick with sweat, and unfurl your ledger. The cost of losing 50 sacks of pepper and the fines for illicit trade could wipe out months of profit. You raise your gaze to the cathedral summit, imagining the bishop's mitre gleaming with braided gold thread. Negotiating with clerics requires deference and deep pockets. You joke that if only you'd brought holy water, you could baptise your pepper as church-approved. You salute the friar and ask if partial compliance is possible, perhaps donating a tenth to the church's poor box in lieu of full surrender. He considers, then nods. A tithe of 10% and the rest may pass by our blessing. You exhale, grateful, and pocket the parchment scroll, now marked with the church's seal of conditional release. A mainstream fact, in the 13th century, the papacy allowed tithes in kind. Merchants could pay a portion of embargoed goods to church almshouses to gain safe conduct. Historians still argue whether this practice diverted charity from the needy or merely legitimised church profits under the guise of mercy. You dispatch 2 crewmen ashore with 10 bags of pepper, instructing them to deliver the tithe to the cathedral's almoner. They return with a stamped receipt, ink smudged by rain, a paper shield against suspicion. You tuck the receipt into your satchel, feeling the delicate balance of faith and finance settle in your chest. As you reel in ropes to depart, you notice a group of merchants whispering on the quay, faces shadowed by hoods, voices low. They speak of a hidden channel through the cloister wall, known to a few daring traders, allowing uninspected passage of wholly embargoed goods. You weigh the legend's lure against the risk of betrayal. Cloister walls watchful, penance is severe. Historians still debate whether such monastic smuggling networks ever truly existed or are simply romantic legends of trade's underworld. You press a finger to your lips, promising discretion, and ponder. Is circumventing embargoes a sin against God's law or a stroke of mercantile genius? You chuckle that if pearl-clutching archbishops heard of cloister smuggling, they'd faint twice, once from shock, once from the strain on their vestment seams. You climb back aboard your cog as the sun dips, scent of incense heavy on the wind. The conditional release clutched in your hand feels both victory and burden. Beyond the patrol ships, open sea beckons. pepper reduced but passage secured. Walking the gangplank, you reflect that religious embargoes wield power over more than cargo. They command consciences and shape alliances. In medieval trade, piety and profit intertwine, and the greatest voyages often navigate not only storms and swords, but also the ever-shifting decrees of faith. With sails unfurled, you glide past the ecclesiastical fleet. The tithed pepper a sacrifice to commerce's higher calling. As bells toll vespers from the cathedral spire, you whisper a prayer of thanks and steer toward distant ports, mindful that in every harbour, doctrine and duty may once again test your resolve. You trudge onto the worn flagstones of the Harbour Guildhall, its timbered facade awash in lantern light and salt spray, and feel a flicker of hope amid your ledger's recent red ink. Inside, merchants gather around oaken tables, their voices low as they discuss a new proposal, a communal risk pool to ensure voyages against storms, piracy, and spoilage. This early insurance innovation promises to transform the perils you face into shared burdens if you dare trust strangers with your coin. A mainstream fact, by the 14th century, Italian merchant republics like Genoa and Florence had developed colleganza contracts, partnership agreements pooling capital to finance single voyages, with profits and losses divided proportionally among investors. Historians still argue whether these collective ventures democratized maritime finance or primarily enriched wealthy elites who dominated the pools. You step forward as Master Ruggery. A silver-haired Venetian trader outlines the scheme. Each participant contributes a sum proportional to the value of goods they wish to insure. If a vessel is lost by storm or sword, claimants receive compensation from the communal fund. You listen as he emphasizes solidarity. Alone, a lost cargo bankrupts you. Together, we absorb shocks like stones breaking water's surface. His words echo in your mind. Shared risk, shared reward. You muse that splash insurance should come with a free life jacket, though life jackets tend to be heretical luxuries in these waters. As contributions tally on a massive chart behind him, you calculate your premium, 5% of your cargo's declared value. It would shave into your profits, but gentle strains of your journey, the rats nibble, the storms flood, the blockades levy, weigh heavily. You slip forward to sign your name on a parchment beside the pool's seal, dipping your quill and swiping a steady line of ink, a quirky tidbit. Fringe rumours speak of gull bond variants, insurance policies in which merchants paid extra for the promise of a trained seagull network that would warn of storms by circling overhead, though no avian app appears in official records. Whether fanciful or foreshadowing modern weather alerts, the idea reveals merchants' desire for every edge. You lean back, lantern light reflecting off polished helmets and silver goblets arrayed on the table. Across the hall, a group of dissenters grumbles that collective insurance weakens personal vigilance. When wealth is guaranteed, one snarls. Wicked captains may sail into danger and claim as if cheated. Historians still debate whether insurance fostered moral hazard, encouraging reckless trade, or simply formalised risk management that salvaged commerce itself. Your gaze drifts to Master Ruggeri's ledger. Names scrawled beside city-states. Marseille, Barcelona, Lisbon, each representing distant ports bound into a shared covenant. You envision your own cog, battered by blockade, intact, its pepper and cloth safe in the knowledge that if calamity strikes, your losses could be recouped. You step to the fund's coffer, dropping in your sealed pouch of florins, its weight echoing soft reassurance. You joke that if only this coffer could sing Never Gonna Give You Up, you'd trust it all the more. A young apprentice pins your receipt to the Guildhall's notice board, a curtain of protected voyages beneath flickering torches. You note the date and policy details, voyage number 47, premium paid, coverage through the Straits of Calais. The apprentice grins, you nod, knowing the guild's clerks will validate claims should tragedy arise. Historians still argue whether medieval insurance was a genuine financial revolution or merely a contractual dance postponing the inevitability of ruin. Yet as you watch merchants nod in solemn agreement, you feel the ancient Guildhall's solidarity pulse stronger than any decree. You slip the receipt into your satchel and flash a glance at Master Ruggieri, catching his approving nod. Across the hall, a tall Genoese merchant unfurls an ambitious map, plotting routes through lesser-known straits to minimise exposure. You file that idea away, diversify risk, both by pooling funds and by charting novel courses. A quirky tidbit. Some fringe chroniclers claim that certain merchants experimented with ship mutuals, requiring participating vessels to display a special flag, a black anchor on white, so insured ships would avoid encounters with insured pirates who respected the flag. Though naval records remain silent on truce at sea pacts, the notion sounds fanciful, yet you sense its kernel of ingenuity. As the meeting closes, candles guttering, you step into the cool night. The water's hush against keystones mingles with the promise of shared strength. You guide Marigold toward your awaiting cog, moonlight rippling on the hull, and imagine tomorrow's dawn when your insured cargo will slip past hazards with less fear. You muse that medieval insurance brokers should have offered merchant meditation sessions, sound dampening for anxious hearts. Climbing aboard, you pat the coffer where premiums are pooled and murmur a vow, here's to safer seas and sturdy ledgers. You give the helmsman quiet instructions to sail at first light along a sheltered channel, knowing that between prudent navigation and collective backing, your gambled goods stand a fighting chance. In this moment, you grasp that insurance innovations merged commerce with collaboration, transforming individual perils into communal responsibility. For a medieval merchant like you, the greatest voyage is not one of miles alone, but of forging bonds to cushion every fall. As you settle into your bunk below deck, the coffer's soft thuds underfoot a lullaby of security. You realise that in an unpredictable world, shared risk may be the surest path to lasting profit. You trudge down the narrow alley leading to the Weaver's Hall, its heavy oak doors banded in iron. Doors that have kept countless hopeful merchants waiting in the cobblestone street. Beyond them lies access to the city's most lucrative markets, but entry is gated by the guild's steep initiation fees and labyrinthine statutes. You feel the weight of your purse as you approach. This is the moment when many dreams collapse under the cost of membership. A mainstream fact in medieval cities such as London and Paris. Powerful guilds, craft associations for weavers, dyers, and metalworkers controlled trade by requiring newcomers to pay hefty admission fees, often amounting to more than a year's average wage. Historians still argue whether these fees protected established artisans from predatory competition or entrenched social inequality by barring skilled but poor newcomers. You step before the gilded lectern where the guild beadle awaits, ledger open and stylus in hand. He scans your shoes, your cloak's fabric, even the coin pouches at your belt, as though appraising your very worthiness. State your trade and propose your sponsorship, he commands in a clipped tone. You straighten, feeling every eye of assembled masters on your back, and recite your credentials. Apprentice of Master Fiorenzo in Florence. 5 seasons experience, and a letter of recommendation from the merchant of Lubeck. You wonder if they'll charge extra for the recommendation's fancy wax seal. Luxury endorsement, 2 extra groats. The beadle nods, then slides a sealed scroll across the lectern. Here are the terms, he says. You break the seal to reveal a list of dues, the entry fee, the cost of a ceremonial gown, contributions to the guild's relief fund, and an annual tithe on all your future earnings, tabulated in precise florins and denarii. The total demands half your current capital, leaving you scarcely enough to cover the first shipment of dyed linens you carry. A quirky tidbit. Fringe chronicles tell of a rogue merchant who insisted on paying his fee in beehives, arguing honey was the guild's sweetest asset, though no records show if the bees survived the upheaval. You recall that in some Italian city-states, guilds even required entrance to host a feast for all members, a lavish spectacle costing more than the fee itself. You realise your stout-hearted vow to join now demands sacrifices you hadn't fully calculated yet. Guildmasters still argue whether initiation fees spur loyalty or simply enrich the coffers of the elite, you murmur, echoing the scholarly debate you once read in a dusty manuscript. The masters exchange glances. Some scowl. Others smile thinly at your invocation of their own controversies. You half wish you'd memorised a scandalous rumour about them to tip the balance. Psst, I hear Master Dunstan's dye vat once exploded. You clear your throat and ask if staggered payment is possible. The beadle tilts his head. We accept 3 instalments, each due at quarter days, he concedes. Your relief is tempered by the knowledge that quarter days will find you perpetually in debt until you've paid every cent, and that default could revoke your guild privileges entirely. A mainstream fact, some guilds allowed quarter dues to ease entry burdens, yet required official guarantors, existing masters who co-sign the newcomer's bond, assuming liability in case of default. Historians still argue whether requiring sponsors upheld communal responsibility or fostered nepotism by restricting entry to well-connected aspirants. You produce a letter from Master Fiorenzo, who agrees to co-sign, though his parchment note hints at expectations of future favours. You affix your wax seal beside his on the bond. The beadle stamps both seals in red wax, binding you legally to the guild's statutes and to Fiorenzo's goodwill. You quip that owing favours to your sponsor might mean wielding a loom or cleaning vats at a moment's notice. Surprise, you're on dye duty. With formalities complete, the guild doors swing open to reveal a vaulted chamber where apprentices shuttle between looms, and masters examine bolts of cloth with magnifying lenses. A hush falls as you enter, your first step as a recognised weaver within the guild's ranks. You consider the paradox. These barriers protected your trade's reputation, but also gated opportunity behind gold and influence. Across the room, a cohort of wealthy cloth merchants lounges, their robes heavier than any bolt of fabric you carry. You wonder how many talented weavers, perhaps even kin, remained barred outside, unable to surmount the monetary bulwark. Historians still debate whether any alternative models, like licensed journeyman permits, ever truly challenged guild hegemony or simply existed as theoretical proposals in civic charters. You feel that today, you've embraced the old order with all its flaws, trading freedom for security under the guild's umbrella. As you take your seat among new peers, the beadle announces the induction ceremony, a short prayer, a symbolic knotting of your belt with the guild's ribbon, and an oath to uphold the craft's honour. You bow your head and recite the vow, feeling the ribbon cinch your waist like a pact. Outside, the alley's shadows deepen, and the city lanterns glow golden. You step back into the street, newly numbered among guild members, coin lighter, but with rights to trade unchallenged within these walls. The weight of the fee lingers in your pocket, but so does the promise of legal protection, access to markets, and the backing of fellow masters. You stroke the ribbon at your side, its colour a banner of both privilege and obligation. As you guide Marigold away from the guild hall, you sense that every stitch in your future success will be woven under the guild's watchful eye, and every profit measured against the cost of entry itself. And so you press onward, a newly minted member of the Weavers' Guild, mindful that in medieval commerce, breaking barriers often required burying more coin at the threshold than you dared hope to earn inside. You trudge over a low wooden bridge spanning a slow river, the roar of distant waterfalls mingling with the clatter of your cart's wheels. And you realise the next hazard isn't bandits or storms, but the tangle of foreign tongues and cryptic merchant ciphers that stand between your goods and eager buyers. Words scrawl on tavern walls, traders' ledgers, and customs notices in alphabets you scarcely recognise, and one false interpretation can cost you far more than a broken wheel. A mainstream fact, in medieval Europe, Latin served as the lingua franca of learned commerce, but everyday trade relied on dozens of local dialects: Middle High German, Old Occitan, Venetian dialects, and more, forcing merchants to employ interpreters or learn rudimentary phrases themselves. Historians still argue whether this linguistic diversity enriched cultural exchange or simply erected barriers that advantaged well-connected polyglots. You pause at a shuttered stall in a bustling bazaar, where a slick-faced merchant displays bolts of dyed silk beneath a sign in scribbled Arabic script. You've learned a handful of phrases. Kam yakul, to ask how much is this, but the stall's ledger uses a cipher of dots and slashes marking weight and price in dirhams. You crack open your notebook, where you've copied rudimentary symbols, and trace each mark with your finger, murmuring translations under your breath. You muse that decoding merchant scribbles feels like trying to read a chicken's scratchings, except the chicken gets paid, and you might go hungry. Beside you, a local scribe named Raymond offers help for a small fee. He charges you a dirham to interpret the ledger, 1 bolt at 3 dirhams plus a half for the die, he says, voice soft as desert wind. You jingle the coin in your palm and hand it over. Grateful, yet wary. Overdependence on interpreters can invite overcharging or misdirection. A quirky tidbit. Fringe accounts claim that in some Mediterranean ports, merchants communicated via salt code, dropping grains in a pattern on tables to signal price negotiations in place of spoken words. Though no coastal archive confirms this briny ballet, you thank Raymond and repeat the price aloud in halting phrasing, careful to mimic his accent. Thalatha dirhams wa nisf. The stall keeper nods, then offers a slightly better deal, discounting the half dirham. You grin inwardly, relief warming you like the desert sun. Historians still debate whether local dialects fostered tight-knit trading communities or bred xenophobia and suspicion of outsiders. For you, every new phrase learned feels like both a key and a trap. Further down the quay, you encounter a knot of pilgrims speaking a Gaelic dialect. Their carts laden with salt and wool. You recognise the runic-looking letters on their cargo tags, a cryptic merchant cipher used to keep track of ownership and route, else rival traders might steal identity or misdirect shipments. You glimpse symbols scratched into oak tags, triangles, lines, and crosses, each marking origin, destination, and commission owed. You joke that these tags look like the world's most convoluted connect-the-dots puzzle. If you complete it, you win a free mule. You pull out your own set of brass tokens, engraved with your family mark, and match them against the pilgrim's tags. With patient guidance, they explain that a diagonal slash through a triangle means pass through Derry, deliver to Cork, while a cross circle indicates stop at monastic guest house. You nod, copying their symbols into your notebook, aware that mastering these ciphers opens doors to faster, safer passage. A mainstream fact, merchant ciphers, often called merchant's marks, served as personal signatures on contracts and cargo, evolving into complex codes that only insiders could decipher, effectively defending against fraud and misrouting. Historians still argue whether such marks democratized identity protection or simply created an inner circle of traders at the expense of newcomers. As you chart the pilgrim's symbols, a light rain begins to patter on the planks. You shrug on your cloak and glance at your notebook, where Latin headings sit atop Gaelic and Arabic notes, a trilingual tapestry that stitches together diverse markets. You recall that bilingual or multilingual merchants commanded premium rates for their navigation of linguistic labyrinths, often out-earning those restricted to a single tongue. You muse that being fluent in 3 dead languages must count as a unique selling point. Hire me. I speak Latin, Old Norse, and bureaucraties. You bid farewell to the pilgrims and press on, scanning a customs post where notices in Gothic script and runes cover the wooden boards. You pass the Gothic letters. Statutum Venditionis marks sales regulations, while your fingers trace the carved runic directives forbidding certain exports. A customs clerk beckons you forward. He demands proof that you grasp both inscriptions or face fines. You present a hastily scribbled translation. Sales permitted. No exports of salted fish. He nods approvingly and waves you through. Historians still debate whether such public postings in multiple scripts truly empowered merchants or burdened them with impossible literacy demands. You wonder how many smugglers simply pretended ignorance to invoke leniency, or paid hush money to skip the literacy test entirely. As dusk falls, you reach a roadside tavern where hooded scribes and clerks gather in semicircle, sharing language tips amid mugs of spiced ale. You join them, exchanging quips in Italian, English, and the patois of the region. Laughter ripples through the group as someone mispronounces stagnant oaths in archaic French. You correct their phrase, serments, stagnants, and feel a flush of pride. You tuck your notebook away, each page a testament to your growing arsenal of words and symbols. No longer intimidated by foreign scripts, you recognise that language mastery is as powerful as any sword or ledger. For a medieval merchant, tongues and ciphers are both tools of survival and keys to new horizons. You leave the tavern under starlight, Marigold waiting patiently at the door. Your notebook's pages rustle softly in your pack, whispering promises of uncharted markets. With each new phrase and mark deciphered, you carve a path through linguistic walls and bring the world's commerce just a bit closer to your grasp. You trudge through the pre-dawn mist as the first pale light seeps over rolling heath, guiding Marigold along a track lined with distant granaries and caravanserai. Before you lies the heart of your operation, the sprawling network of suppliers, pack animals, and way stations that ensures your goods can traverse continents. Coordinating this supply chain is a feat of logistics rivaling any battlefield maneuver, and one misstep can unravel months of planning. A mainstream fact: medieval trade networks stretched from Flanders to the Silk Road, relying on relay stations, caravanserai in the east, hands in northern Europe, and agents to handle transfers of goods and payments. Historians still argue whether these networks represented a proto-global economy or were fragmented systems held together by personal trust and local patronage. You pause at the first way station, its wooden sign creaking in the breeze. St. Aurelian's Post, fresh horses and lodging. Inside, stable hands prepare tired mounts and inspect your barrels of wine and bales of cloth. You check off names in your tote ledger, each caravan leg assigned to a different handler based on local expertise. You retrieve a sealed pouch from your saddlebag, containing letters of credit for each station, and distribute one to the station steward, Master Berard, whose lined face brightens at the sight of his share. You muse that if only there were a medieval primaire, packages might actually arrive on time. Further along, you reach a desert caravanserai, a walled fortress of sandstone where camels groan beneath their packs of spices and silk. You barter fresh water and barley for your own mounts, careful to confirm the next guide's reputation. His scarred face and missing finger speak of sandstorms and bandit skirmishes. You hand over your sealed contract and watch as he stamps it with his camel leather seal, a mark that guarantees safe passage through the dunes. A quirky tidbit: some fringe accounts describe Bedouin tribes issuing poetic oaths, carved on palm leaf scrolls that bound merchants to chivalric codes of hospitality, though few such scrolls survive. You recall that historians still argue whether these tribal pacts or formal treaties held more sway in desert trade. Either way, your silk and pepper rely on both inked contracts and honoured word. As the sun sets, you arrive at a wooded depot where pack horses are replaced with sturdy river barges for the next leg. You coordinate with Captain Amelia, whose boat will carry your grain and cheese downstream to a market fair. She demands a portion of your goods as freight payment, an age-old custom known as tide dues. You measure and hand over 2 barrels of cheese, nodding as she inscribes the handover in her ledger. A mainstream fact: medieval merchants often paid up to 10% of cargo value in kind for freight, cheese, wine, or grain rather than coin, aligning the carrier's incentive with cargo preservation. Historians still debate whether in-kind use fostered better stewardship or simply shifted spoilage risks to carriers. You settle into your cabin on the barge, watching oars dip in time with the river's pulse. Beneath, the hold rumbles gently with cattle footfall, their hides stamped with a shepherd's mark to ensure correct delivery. You unroll your route map, each leg marked in different inks, red for caravan, blue for river, black for coastal shipping. The coloured lines blur in lamplight, a tapestry of your supply chain. At each transfer point, you cross-reference notes. Horsemasters expected a feed advance. Caravaner chai, a cup of tea served as token hospitality. River pilots demanded an orientation fee to navigate shifting sandbars. You tally all these micro-expenses in a hidden column. It's the unseen cost of transfers that can erode profit margins more than grand tolls or piracy. You quip that supply chain managers in your time must have had the patience of saints and the nerves of drowning sailors. Above deck, you feel the barge's slow sway lull you. You recall scholars still argue whether medieval logistics relied more on standardized scales and measures or on the personal bonds forged between merchant families and local agents. Your own chain depends equally on parchment contracts and the loyalty of men like Berard and Amelia, human links whose reputations underpin every transaction. At dawn you disembark at the river's mouth, where a Hanseatic cog awaits to carry your goods across the sea. You oversee the transfer, linens rolled onto deck, barrels lashed to timbers, crates labelled in Latin and Gothic. Dock workers grumble over wages and humidity's effect on wood, so you barter a few extra florins for expedited loading, costly, but worth the time saved before the tide shifts. A waterfront scribe stamps your cargo manifest in triplicate, one copy for your records, one for the port authority, one for the captain. You file each in a waterproof chest, aware that misfiled documents can strand goods indefinitely. Historians still debate whether medieval record-keeping was a hindrance or a cornerstone of reliable trade. You push off at last, sails catching the morning breeze, and smile at your layered network of suppliers, carriers and scribes, the supply chain that spans kingdoms, deserts and rivers. Each transfer point, each stamped contract, each sealed pouch binds your fortune to countless hands. You muse that modern supply chains boast barcodes, but you'd happily trade them for the romance of sealed letters and camel oaths. As your cog glides away from shore, you reflect that managing this chain, coordinating distant workshops, caravan routes, river fords, and port officials is as much an art as it is an accounting exercise. In medieval trade, forging these connections demands both meticulous planning and the willingness to adapt when any single link falters. With the coastline fading behind you, you lean on the rail, penning notes for the next leg and praying no unforeseen break will leave your goods adrift. For a merchant, charting a supply chain means weaving a map of trust, contracts, and contingencies, and every successful transfer is a victory over chaos itself. You trudge into the vaulted chamber of the mercer's hall, candlelight glinting off polished oak desks and weighty tomes chained to lecterns. Tonight, amid hushed whispers and quills scratching across parchment, you confront perhaps the most perilous challenge of all: accounting errors. One misplaced digit in your double-entry ledger can turn profit into ruin and, in extreme cases, provoke accusations of fraud that end not in fines but in censure or worse. In the late medieval period, Italian merchants pioneered the double-entry bookkeeping system, each transaction recorded as both debit and credit, to ensure balances always matched, reducing errors and deterring embezzlement. Historians still argue whether this innovation democratized financial accuracy across Europe or remained confined to wealthy merchant republics for decades. You push aside a stack of ledgers to reveal your own book, neat columns of florins, deniers, and vanishing pennies. Tonight, to Sistar, you must reconcile your accounts for the last quarter's voyages, bandit losses, spoilage write-offs, tolls paid, and the new insurance premiums you just signed. You light a beeswax candle whose flame flickers over ink-blotted pages, heart pounding at the thought of a tally failing to resolve. You muse that if only your ledger came with an error notification ding, you'd never miss a cent. You run a quill down the debit column, storm damage repairs 12 florins, then across to the credit side, insurance payout 8 florins. A disparity glares back. 4 florins unaccounted. Your stomach flips. You scan earlier entries, thickening the air with the scent of damp parchment and spilled wine. You spot a missing entry. The silver paid to the harbour master at Port Sancta for religious embargo concessions slipped your mind. You scrawl the correction, a quirky tidbit. Fringe sources suggest some merchants used hidden marginalia, tiny doodles of anchors or lions, to flag suspicious entries. A personal cipher to track potential discrepancies. Historians still debate whether these symbols formed an early audit trail or simply merry distractions in dreary ledgers. As you balance the columns, another figure emerges from shadow, Master Corleone, the hall's senior accountant. He peers over your shoulder, eyes narrowed. Ensure your carried forward balances match, he intones. A single misbalance invites guild scrutiny. You nod, throat tight. Guild auditors pride themselves on detecting falsehood. A single imbalance could end in public whips or loss of membership. You turn to the carried forward totals at the page's base. Assets, liabilities, and equity. The numbers must tally precisely, or your reputation, and perhaps your freedom, hangs in the balance. You recheck totals with a small brass abacus, its beads sliding under calloused fingers. The rhythm steadies you, each bead's click a promise of precision. You joke that if only those beads had an undo button, accounting might be a joy. Below deck, Marigold's soft breathing drifts upward, a reminder that the world outside awaits tomorrow's sails. Here, in this hush, a merchant's salvation lies in arithmetic accuracy. You re-add the quarterly revenues, cloth sales, spice bartering, wine shipments, line by line, then expenses, tolls, insurance, bribes, food for camp. Each number finds its counterpart. A mainstream fact, by the 15th century, Venetian merchant families maintained multi-volume ledgers, hiring full-time scriveners to avoid errors that could spark ruinous lawsuits. Historians still debate whether such professionalisation widened the gulf between small-scale traders and powerful houses. Your quill hovers over the final line. Net profit, 37 florins, 4 deniers. You cross-reference with your pouch. Does the coin stink of reality? You press your palm to the leather beneath your belt and count florins by feel. 1, 2, 5, 10, until you reach 37. Then weigh the pouch for the small deniers. It matches. Relief floods your chest, mingling with the candle's warm glow. A quirky tidbit. Some merchants purportedly carried pocket-sized wheels, circular slide rules, to perform rapid checks on sums, though no extant examples survive. Historians still argue whether these devices ever left prototypes or are mere legend. You lean back, eyes stinging from candle flicker and ink fumes. Beyond these walls lie markets where errors cannot be hidden. Every contract you sign, every toll you pay, every barter you strike relies on your ledger's cold certainty. You close the book and seal its clasp with a ribbon, blue for profits, red for expenses, a visual flag for any future audit. You muse that if medieval merchants had spreadsheets, they might never sleep, but at least Excel wouldn't leak ink. You stand, cradling your ledger like a shield. In the mercer's hall, every balanced account signals integrity, every misbalance, suspicion. You pass Corleone at the door. He nods once, solemnly. Outside, the night air feels crisp, a cleansing breath after the chamber's intensity. As you guide Marigold toward your ship, the ledger secured in stout leather, you reflect that mastering supply chains, credit, and blockades matters little if the final reckoning fails. In medieval trade, Surviving finance's labyrinth demands more than courage. It demands unerring precision. And so, with your accounts balanced and reputation intact, you step into tomorrow's dawn, knowing that every coin you count today shapes the profit that drops into your purse, and the fate that awaits any miscalculation. You lean against the weathered rail of your cog as it drifts into the dawnlit estuary, salt spray kissing your cheeks and a soft breeze whispering of distant markets. Below deck, your crates, once scattered across forests, fields, and seas, are stacked with care, each marked trunk and barrel bearing the scars and stamps of every trial you've faced. Bandit breaks, storm seals, toll house stamps, guild banners, quarantine marks, insurance seals, sponsorship ribbons, credit contracts, legal seals, ciphered tags, and ledger rubrics. You trace a finger along the score of markings and realise they form more than history. They form a legacy, the bedrock of modern global trade. In the centuries since medieval merchants first braved these perils, trade networks evolved into the intricate web of today's supply chains, couriered by corporations that still echo those ancient convoys. A mainstream fact, modern insurance markets trace their roots directly to 14th century Italian colleganza and English marine insurance policies, which established principles of risk diversification and underwriting that underpin contemporary global finance. Historians still argue whether the medieval experiments in shared risk spurred financial innovation or primarily served elite interests, but their impact is undeniable. Your mind drifts to the pepper pouch you sacrificed at Port Sanctus Cathedral. Today's embargoes and sanctions arise from the same nexus of faith and politics. You recall the tales of salted fish escapes, blockades, and embargoes that shaped medieval economies. In our age, economic sanctions wield similar power, illustrating how strategic embargoes can pressure states without shots fired. Yet scholars still debate whether such measures achieve ethical goals or inflict undue civilian suffering. You muse that modern snack taxes and trade wars are just medieval embargoes in business suits. You touch the brass abacus saved from that fateful night of accounting anxiety, a precursor to ledger systems that matured into double-entry bookkeeping, now performed by cloud software with real-time analytics. The same meticulous attention to balance has evolved into audit trails and compliance frameworks that govern modern corporations. Were medieval merchants the first to fear unbalanced books, or simply the bravest to codify their fears? Historians still argue whether standardization of accounting practices was driven by necessity or by the ambitions of powerful banking families. You glance at the horizon, where the first merchant freighters and oil tankers ply established sea lanes, a testament to routes first charted by the caravans and cogs of old. Those desert oaths, Bedouin guides, and monastic smugglers all point to a human need for connection. Quirky tidbit, some fringe theorists claim that medieval merchants' marks are ancestors of modern barcodes, a cheeky notion, yet a reminder that identity and traceability have long been commerce's twin pillars. Your ledger sits open in your lap, columns of debits and credits bridging past and present. Modern supply chains rely on just-in-time inventories, an echo of medieval way stations timed to horse relays and river tides. Scholars still debate whether JIT models mirror medieval agility or represent a radical departure made possible only by digital communication. You imagine your own caravan built from algorithms instead of camels, yet the core challenge remains, aligning distant nodes to deliver goods efficiently. You joke that if medieval merchants had email, they'd still forget to attach the contract. The world beyond these rails now hums with container ships and cargo planes. But their beating heart is centuries old. Protocols for letters of credit survive in modern credit default swaps. Emergency token coinage lives on in digital vouchers. Quarantine stations have morphed into airport health checks. Each medieval risk, bandit ambush, stormy sea, embargo, guild barrier, finds new form in cyber attacks, supply chain disruptions, regulatory hurdles, and corporate cartels. Historians still argue which modern challenges most closely mirror medieval ones, but the parallels are striking. You rise as deckhands unfurl the jib for docking, a ritual as precise now as when you first lit that beeswax candle to reconcile your books. Markets awaken around you, forklifts beep, cranes swing, cargo is logged in barcode scanners that rival any scribe's quill. The machinery is new, but the dance is the same. Trust, risk, negotiation, and the ever-present gamble that if one link fails, the whole chain trembles. You muse that today's shipping container emoji could easily replace medieval trade signs, though it lacks the charm of hand-painted carvings. You step ashore, drawing deep breaths of salt and diesel, and clutch your satchel, the one that carried pepper, credit, and contracts through every test. You feel the legacy in its worn leather, that commerce endures when human ingenuity meets peril with perseverance. Historians still debate whether medieval merchants invented globalization or merely glimpsed its first sparks. Regardless, as you stride toward the warehouse district, you carry forward their lessons, diversify risk, forge alliances, master logistics, balance books, adapt to regulations, and speak many tongues. Then, in every handshake and signed parchment, rest a promise that each voyage, no matter how small, pushes the world towards seamless exchange. And so, with one foot in the present and one planted firmly amid history's trade routes, you embrace your legacy, the perils you conquered, the contracts you forged, and the networks you wove are threads in the vast tapestry of global commerce, stretching from silent medieval paths to bustling port terminals. Beneath a sky soft with dawn's blush, you stand at the water's edge, the harbour's bustle dimming to a distant murmur. Feel your shoulders loosen, the taut posture easing as you inhale the briny air and exhale the burdens of old anxieties. The silhouettes of cranes and masts fade into gentle shapes, and the clank of rigging becomes a lullaby. Allow the legacy of centuries, the double-entry scribbles, the caravan's beat, the blockade's shadow, to dissolve into a soft memory. Here, on solid ground, every risk and reward settles into the calm certainty that commerce endures through human will and shared trust. The tangled roots of supply and demand untangle into peaceful lines on your mind's map. Your steps slow, guided by the harbour's gentle rhythm. Each breath invites reassurance. Each exhale releases the echoes of past perils, storms, bandits, embargoes, like leaves drifting on a lazy current. You are more than a merchant, you're a guardian of tradition, a weaver of connections, and now a bearer of calm reflection. As warmth fills the air, the dock's lanterns wane. You close your eyes, imagining the waves' quiet song and the horizon's endless promise. In this moment, profit and peril rest alike, transformed into gentle lessons carried in your heart. Now, let the harbour's hush guide you into rest, secure in the knowledge that every path yet unwoven awaits your steady hand. Sweet dreams.